Where the hell, or rather, who the hell is Lila in Miraculous Ladybug Season 6? One of the big talking points that came out of the 5th season of Miraculous was the character of Lila. After a couple of seasons where she was very slowly building herself up as a potential next major villain, she ended up getting the Butterfly Miraculous after the death of Gabriel Agreste, and abandoned the identity of Lila for a different name. I will say that I've seen a lot of people switch over to using Cerise as her name now, but for the ease of my brain, I'm going to call her Lila for the time being. It's like when we first switched from Hawkmoth to Shadowmoth and then to Monarch. It took me time to adjust to those as well, but at least there the episode would use the new name. For me, unless they actually ever have the characters consistently calling her Cerise, it's gonna stay Lila. Hell, they still used it in the most recent episode. I'm honestly shocked to have seen so many people switch over to using it so quickly, to tell you the truth. But yeah, she abandoned the name of Lila supposedly and set herself up to be the next villain of the show, even calling Mr. Damocles ahead of time to enroll at the school. There was that whole mystery about the blue light that was never really resolved, and then Miraculous London saw her make her debut in a very big way. Since then, we haven't really seen all that much of her in the flesh, or so we think. She just does the obligatory appearance when akumatizing people, but instead of actually showing her, it's a presence in the person's head. It feels a lot creepier this way, to tell you the truth. We have seen a whole lot less of it by this stage of the game than we did with Hawkmoth by the time we'd reached this point in Season 1. Yes, technically we didn't get the full confirmation of who Hawkmoth was until the end of that season, but we still got to see the character and get an idea of what his goals and personality were. Lila not so much. They've been keeping her far more mysterious and out of the limelight. However, the ending of Season 5 very clearly stated that Lila was around in some way and that she would be watching. I don't think this is a plot point they're ever going to be dropping. This meant that the fandom was on high alert when we first came back to the show because we were curious as to where she was going to turn up. Would they play it obvious and have a character that's clearly her and manipulating her way into the group? Or would they be a bit subtle about it? Subtlety in the writing has never been something that's been a strong point for Miraculous, and so I think that everybody came into it expecting it to be rather obvious overall. However, it very quickly became clear that this was not necessarily the case. After all, the early episodes had established very quickly that there are a bunch of new characters that had joined the group out of nowhere. The most notable of these characters were ACTUALLY, Diane, and Sublime. Instantly we can discount Diane. I just don't see any upside in having it be her, because, well, Lila's white, and you'd have her use some sort of, magical incognito blackface to infiltrate the group? That's not going to fly, and it would be so awful. So it's a firm no from me. At the same time, I also don't see them making their newly introduced para-athlete character secretly evil. Nope. I think unless Lila shows that she's some sort of witch who can completely change her appearance in huge aspects like becoming black or not having legs, then we can firmly rule it out as being one of these two. Thus, from fairly early on, I was kind of thinking Lila was ACTUALLY, and I think that the more we've seen from her character, the more suspicious she's become outright, to the point that I think there are a lot of people within the fandom cottoning on. At the same time though, there's also enough reasonable doubt that's been given to make us think that maybe they're not one and the same person. Could this be a red herring character? Somebody that they direct suspicion onto in order to throw you off the scent and make any other potential reveal hit harder? Perhaps, but in that case, who would it be, right? Because in that eventuality, once you've ruled out the characters we mentioned earlier, it would push it into being a completely background individual. It would make it so that Lila has been at school the whole time, but we've never seen her around or seen her interact with any of the leads. And I don't know about you, but part of me feels like that's supremely unsatisfying overall. I think that a big reveal that Lila's been there all along and manipulating events, even if some of the characters themselves don't find out about it, does need to feel big for the audience. It's way less exciting if it's some nobody, because it leaves you feeling, well, duh, we already knew this part. We already know that she's lurking, we just need to know the who. If it's a character we've never met, then we have no emotional story connection to make us care. If it's a character that's often on screen though, it has more of an impact to the audience overall, and it gets you feeling a certain way. It makes it so that it feels like it matters to the plot and could have a massive impact on the leads. Think about how the revelation of Gabe being Monarch still haunts the narrative now, and is shaping the arc of the two principal characters, as well as having a big effect on the undercurrents of the narrative with the Kingdom and Tamoy and all of that. This is the type of story they need to be pursuing. You want that same feeling of shock that you got when Felix was able to betray Ladybug and give Monarch all the Miraculouses. That's what I'm looking for any big identity reveal. Thus, the question remains, is ACTUALLY Lila? Well, let's take a little bit of a dive into it and see what we can figure out. So we're first introduced to the character in Climatic Queen, and instantly, she got my spider senses going. She just seemed suspicious from the get-go, and I kind of think she's supposed to be. If you follow production order, this is our first look at the character, and yet she's introduced as being decently close friends with the class right from the get-go. Already that's making you take a step back and say, what? Sublime at least gets introduced and has an episode about that, and Diane hasn't really pulled any focus in the story beyond being an extra character to chime in with some conversations. Aglaé, though, gets a whole lot more than that, and it just kind of seems suspicious. Let's not forget that in that episode itself, she's the one whose words set Aurora on the path to becoming akumatized into Climatic Queen. I saw on Reddit that somebody had posted a side-along of her during that scene, and she was doing that chrysalis pose leaning over her shoulder to talk to her. It all just felt very intentional. On top of that, she's out of the episode from that point onwards until she runs back in talking about how she's worried about Aurora, who's already been akumatized at that point, so there's no alibi for where she was at the time of the event, and Adrian and Marinette take her to hide before leaving her alone, which gives her ample time to keep it going afterwards. So like I said, after this episode, that's when my spidey sense was really tingling quite a lot, but I think the episodes since then we've slowly gotten more and more evidence that this might be the case. Chronologically, from the episodes that we have gotten, you don't actually see her that much, so if you view it in production order, it gives you time for your suspicions to somewhat cool off. There's only brief mentions of her character in both Daddy Cop and Werepapas, and it isn't until Dark Castle that we see her again. Now, I saw Dark Castle after I saw Reckless Driver, and so I came into the episode with my suspicions somewhat cooled off, simply because I felt that Reckless Driver had come on so strong with it that it was an intentional red herring. I thought that they were trying to draw focus to her so hard that it made my brain enter contrarian mode and try to disprove my own theory that was going on with the character. The first thing that made me start to reconsider in Dark Castle, though, was when they're all talking about Alex in the cafeteria. They're explaining to one of the newer characters, I don't actually know what his name is, but they're telling him about who Alex is and why she isn't with them at the moment. How she has to keep on traveling through time on adventures until Ladybug and Cat Noir can defeat Monarch. Aglaé's the only character that really expresses any sort of doubt as to whether the two are going to be able to pull it off, and so poor Alex is going to be left time traveling forever. Now, at first that's innocuous, but spoken by somebody with this many red flags already, it kind of does draw attention. Almost like she legitimately believes her words, perhaps because she truly believes that she's going to be able to pull it off and defeat the heroes herself. Maybe? On top of that, there's the fact that Lila always loved to needle Marinette, and if she's starting to suspect that Marinette's Ladybug, then trying to manipulate her into doing something stupid or simply trying to hurt her feelings by suggesting she screwed over one of her friends is completely within her wheelhouse. The ending of Dark Castle, where Lila says that she wasn't there, but that she's going to keep testing her theory again and again, 100% points to the idea that Lila had suspicions ahead of time that Marinette was Ladybug. Then you have to think that Aglaé's comment wasn't the sole factor, but was one of the factors that led to Marinette creating this plan. A plan that requires Ladybug taking up the Rabbit Miraculous for the day so that Alex is not at risk out and about. Lila would already have a lot of knowledge about who some of the minor heroes are. She would know that Alex is the bunny and that Chloe used to be the bee. We know that she knows Kagami's the dragon and that Felix is the peacock because we saw that in Yaxi Gozen, and if she had a lot of the information that Gabe had simply by being allied with Tomoe, then she probably has knowledge on a bunch of the others too. She wouldn't have all of them, but a lot of them. Everybody who had one by the time of Miracle Queen at the very least. This in turn makes me think that she should be able to easily hone in on the potential suspects for the others, and particularly Ladybug, because let's be real, there's a very obvious pattern of who she's picking. Thus, when Marinette is not at the party, it raises the suspicion that she's Ladybug. Not enough to truly confirm it, but considering earlier on she was one of the strongest voices for Alex and seems like she wanted her to have a great birthday, and yet suddenly she's sick? Especially since we've already seen that being sick isn't usually going to stop her getting involved with something she's passionate about, like in The Ruler. Thus, it is a solid explanation that she's Ladybug. Regardless, for Lila to know that she wasn't at the party would mean that she was either spying from a distance, which is the most boring answer, and I think they're not going to go in that direction. The writing's taking a lot more risks and setting up a lot of mystery, and I think they want more of that to carry on into the endgame of the season. But the other explanation is that she was at the party as well, and can see that of everybody in their immediate social circle, Marinette was the only non-attendee. You know who was at the party though? Aglaé. She even brings attention to the fact that Marinette isn't at the party to begin with. There are so many different characters that could have been given that line to notice she's not there, like, I don't know, her boyfriend perhaps. But instead they go with Aglaé, who chronologically has been a non-factor in the story so far. So we know that she's at the party at one point. However, by the time of the akumatization, which is happening concurrently with them bringing out the cake and singing to Alex, which is one of the most important parts of a birthday party, she's just gone. Everybody else is in that group shot except for her. Thus, there's the potential she's dipped off to go and transform and be able to cause some chaos and try to draw Ladybug out. By the time of the end credits, she's still not returned, and she doesn't feature in the ending card. For me, this is probably the most damning evidence of the lot, and is very blink and you'll miss it, but it makes a lot of sense. She has to be alone to transform and use her powers, so she has to dip out of the party she'd been at previously. Similarly, she's unaccounted for at the time of Climatic Queen's akumatization. This then brings us to Reckless Driver. Just a lot of sus moments of the character in that episode too. It revolves around Aglaé being scared of bugs because of being attacked by an akumatized villain, and how this has consumed her life and it's only gotten worse and worse. The fear of bugs after being a victim of an akumatized villain, it does make sense. For it to spiral and make her afraid of Ladybug the hero though, that doesn't. It feels forced, and I think it could be her simply channeling her hatred for Ladybug. After all, we only get that one sample. Despite appearing in the same scene, we never see how she interacts with Vesperia, for instance, so we have to take her at her word. But since she's so suspicious, it's hard to do that. When she's alone with the therapist to try to get to grips with her fears, she describes her trauma of being attacked by Timebreaker and then of being akumatized herself as the very first victim of the new butterfly. For starters, introducing yourself under a new identity by being the first victim, that's classic misdirection. Nobody's going to suspect you then, and people are going to feel sorry for you and likely want to talk to you, which also gives her the chance to ingratiate herself within the group. Also, when she's akumatized, she overtly becomes butterfly themed, and we don't actually see her talk to Chrysalis in her flashback, we simply have to take her word for it that it did happen, and then on top of that, her power puts people inside a chrysalis. Then there's the fact that she unleashes some really unexpected rage when the therapist tells her that she's not going to be cured within one session. She's then in the elevator alone, which would give her time to transform and send out the Akuma. Yeah, her friends are chasing her down the stairs, but the reality is that stairs will be far slower than an elevator that's already started its descent, and yet by the time they catch her, she's only just gotten on her bike. You'd think she should have been able to get going pretty quickly, because she sprinted into the elevator and you'd think she'd sprint to her bike and pedal off. But no, they're able to catch her, and thus I think there was enough time for her to akumatize that lady, especially if she pre-planted an Akuma like we know she's done before. Once she gets caught by the villain and let go, once Ladybug saves her, there's no follow-up on where she goes and what she does until that exposure therapy scene. And as for the legit fear of bugs that she does have, who says Lila isn't afraid of bugs? I do remember her not wanting an Akuma near her face at one point during the London special, and I think she clearly hates Nuru beyond what's normal. She doesn't want him flapping around and creeping her out, maybe? Maybe she is afraid of bugs and she just has that mind over matter type of personality. I do think it would add a lot of intrigue to her character if indeed this was something she's legitimately afraid of. Hell, I think the Timebreaker anecdote being true would also be really interesting. Anyway though, beyond all this, there's really not that much to discuss. It's still the early days and she's made some very limited appearances. So I do think there's going to be more to come that could either help to confirm or allay my suspicions. For now though, I'm pretty firmly in the Lila is Aglaé camp, but of course these are simply my opinions and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of what we've discussed today? Are you with me on this? Maybe not. Do you have any other suspicions of your own? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.